When you're talking about just knowledge, I mean, anyone can memorize facts, but to bring your own spirit into it, I feel is very impactful.
Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the TF Cast. I am Willis, one of your hosts.
Hey, we got Grum here, and I'm at the big kids table today, everybody. It's January 25th here in the solarium.
And I am your host, Jacob Bases. Today with us, we are very pleased to bring in Holly and Nicholas of the Lectern Series. Holly, Nicholas, whoever wants to go first, just let us know what the program is about and how people can connect with it.
Okay, yeah, I'll start. So, the Lectern Series, well, for me, it kind of represents the essence of teaching. So what it is that we're giving people the opportunity to get up and speak about something that they are interested in. To kind of give a further sort of example of what I mean by teaching is to quote Martin Heidegger, who is a philosopher and phenomenologist. He spoke about how teaching is even more important than learning. And teaching is more important than learning because what teaching calls for is just this, to let learn. And so a teacher's job is to require and encourage their students to not only just ingest information, but to go through the entire sort of full circle process of learning. And so this to me is when I think of teaching, or actually when I think of learning is the interrogation of information. And so we can kind of see learning as very, to quote another philosopher, Hegel, he had a word, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's called Offenbin. And Offenbin was a word with a double meaning. And what it meant was to preserve and to negate at the exact same time. A good example of this is becoming. Becoming preserves being, and at the same time it negates it. And so I see learning as a preserving of knowledge and at the same time negating it. So with the Lectern Series, it initially started out as an event that would allow people to come in and actually teach and lose their ego and be humble and not necessarily just give information. So that so it's not treating the audience or the students or the listeners as machines. There's this expectation of the audience to respond from the input. Do you have anything that you would like to add to just the overall, like what you feel the Lectern Series is about?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think teaching is really important, and I'm not well versed in philosophy, but I do know as a teacher myself that I believe in teaching others, we're actually teaching ourselves. And I know the Lectern Series has given a really wonderful platform for people to investigate topics more thoroughly, and to share that knowledge with other people and to be challenged with it. And it's just really beautiful because we have, in our communities, we have such diverse knowledge and talents, and to have a platform that is available to anyone to come and teach and to share and to interrogate their relationship with that knowledge that's pre-existing is just a really, really beautiful, striking thing. And I mean, the origin of the lectern too, I mean, if you could share about Aunt Diane and her experience with teaching.
Yeah, so it initially started, or the idea came about through the life and actually the death of my aunt. She was an educator for 44 years. She taught speech, debate, and theater to high school students in a very small town called Poseyville in southern Indiana. And she very much valued knowledge, and she was very encouraging to me growing up and even as an adult. And we had numerous conversations over the phone lasting multiple hours about philosophy, about teaching. And in 2019, right before the pandemic, she was transferred to hospice, and I had thankfully, it didn't happen during the pandemic because I wouldn't have been fortunate enough to actually go see her and spend one last day with her. And during the process, or during the conversations, I had recorded her without her knowledge. And we spoke for probably about 4 hours. And later on, I left to get something to eat, came back. She had already been given morphine, so at that point she was out, though I believe still conscious. And then she ended up passing away about 20 minutes after I left. Afterwards, I came back and I ended up gathering all of the recordings that I had made and composed an album called Finale Time, which is what she described as her death experience. And a lot of the recordings display a very sort of a Nietzschean approach to death. And by Nietzschean, I mean by the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. She very much saw a positive light from dying. She sort of used her suffering to basically see all of the positive things that were happening to her during her suffering. So, for instance, she was in the hospital, and she said if it wasn't for her illness, she would have not seen the compassion of all of the hospital staff. And she described these people on the recording as the salt of the earth, which means that they're very important. And it wasn't just the doctors or the nurses or the caregivers. She also described the janitors and the cooks, everybody within the hospital. And so she kind of lived by this concept of amor fati, which I know she was reading Nietzsche quite heavily towards the end of her life. And amor fati translates to English as love of fate. So she saw her death as necessary, and quite truthfully, she learned to love it until the end. So on the recording itself, there is a part where she talks about her lectern. And she had many possessions in her house, mostly of German origin, but it was somewhat of like an antique store. Very difficult to get through. And you couldn't even see the lectern. I had never even noticed it, but she considered this lectern her most prized possession. And in her words, it was because it typified her profession. And I took note of that and kept it. And I would say, what was it, like probably 2 years after her death, Holly and I had met that previous September, and we started discussing about possibly doing some type of series where we gave speeches. And we went down to Indiana and harvested the lectern from my brother's garage and brought it back. And from that point on, I believe we had our first Lectern series. What was it?
Like a month later, I believe.
Yeah, it was about a month later.
Yeah, the lectern fit perfectly into the back of his CRV. And we did. We drove it back from Indiana, and the lectern, is already a symbol of oration and teaching. And so it's really beautiful. And actually, I encourage anyone to go online and hear that recording, that bit where she talks about the lectern. because it's now like a legacy that's kind of like, like I sadly never got to meet Aunt Diane, but we have a lot of stories about her, and I feel like she kind of follows us along with the lectern.
Yeah.
Could I'm sensing a little bit of like a throughfare here with like teaching the lectern and how she felt, but kind of like bringing it all together with like kind of like what's lost and how we don't have so much of an oral tradition anymore.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like what the event is getting to, if I'm
Yep.
like reading this all
No,
correctly.
you are.
And the idea, I think that we hear teaching so much now, and people think of it as like a profession. I mean, the same thing as like learning happens in a school, but I mean, I would disagree with that because like I didn't learn very well in a school. So maybe if we could hear some of like your thoughts on how you intend to change how people share their stories and how regular like people can teach, and just what you think of like how we share stories.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, an important aspect about it. I've mentioned at times about the concept of what an expert is, and I know that it's very difficult for people to get up and speak in front of others, and then to have to endure a Q&A afterwards. It can be very intimidating. But I also kind of want to redefine what an expert is. Do you necessarily need these professional credentials to prove that you are an expert? Anybody can be a teacher. So it's more about, that's why we kind of try to promote people taking their time whenever they're going to give a talk, especially if it's going to be a speech. If it's, sharing their work and they already have experience sharing it, fine, which has happened multiple times. But it's often that you do have to spend the time to prepare and be confident in what you're going to talk about to some degree to get through it.
Well, and I would also say the setting alone, the space alone, offers a really unique opportunity to share a story. I know I personally spoke at one of the lecterns, and I took something that was very academic and very black and white for me, and I recognized that with such a diverse group gathering, that had to be tweaked. And I had to add a different level for it to be impactful. I also included like personal stories, like why did this matter? Why was I studying this? Why is this important to me? And so, yeah, when you're talking about just knowledge, I mean, anyone can memorize facts, but to bring your own spirit into it, I feel is very impactful. Yeah.
I actually really like that. There's a moment going on like in the larger like American landscape right now where that is what people want removed from education. They want education to be a list of facts, and then everything else is parenting. But I think that I'm not sure that that's like a good framework for like strong communities.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, that's kind of like you see a lot in the news around AI and scientists being very interested in somehow sparking consciousness in machines. And right now, when you think about a machine and we are sending it information, we aren't really duplicating knowledge or consciousness. We're to some degree simulating it. And so, yeah, I think there has to be to some degree a different approach to how we see the ingestion of knowledge. And what to do with it whenever we get it. And I think that is to some degree requires a unified process. I like to call it interrogation, but it could be also simply put as critical thinking and using reason and logic, not just basing knowledge off intelligence or I'm sorry, not intelligence, influence, experience. So knowledge is to some degree something that is constantly, it's a state that is constantly updated. And what happens in our society, from my perspective, is that people become very solidified in what they know. And they don't want to change their way of thinking. So they become very dogmatic and ideological in some respects.
Yeah, well, I don't think that there's a whole lot of time. With we've even everything once you get into adulthood, unless you make a real effort to turn away from it, is so heavily commodified. I mean, to include education,
Yeah.
that black and white thinking is just extremely. It's attractive.
It's comfortable.
Yeah, it's extremely comfortable. And I mean, I say that all the time, is that I don't think that there can be any real political change in our country until we see people who are either willing to forfeit their comfort, or if we start like teaching philosophy in grade school, because people just aren't confronting these issues. I know, like, one that I go on for over and over again is how, like, the outward facing opinion on violence in society is that it is unacceptable. But that's, on an individual scale. Institutional violence is absolutely necessary for everything we do to happen. And it is just like a switch of comfort that at any moment, like, you could just turn off and say, like, this is happening, like, I am participating, and it is cowardly to say that I'm not a violent person.
Right.
And that just requires another layer of thought that it isn't something that I feel like anyone would want to be, I don't know, I taught in that way.
Right. Yeah. And it does. I like what you said about it has to kind of be taught in primary schools. Philosophy is very, very important to philosophize and to critical think, and speech and debate. Curriculums ultimately need to be changed completely. I'm not entirely sure that all of the different what do they call them in school? Whenever it's just like a primary subject,
syllabus?
like math.
Curriculum. Oh,
Yeah, well, curriculum, yes, but
Subjects.
but like like a subject, yeah. So, like math. Well, I mean, you said yourself you struggled in school. I struggled in school as well.
I did
I
too.
completely struggled. I
Ditto.
didn't. I did not go to college.
Same.
I went to college, but barely. High school was another story.
Right.
I mean, barely squeaked out of there.
But college helps with that self-discipline, and there are some people that, quite truthfully, do not need that self-discipline. In a lot of cases, it's sort of innate. But these curriculums kind of need to change, and what is considered important in society really needs to change. I mean, there's a big problem when most of the budget goes to a sport.
Oh,
But it
yeah.
also makes sense because that's where the money's coming from. So, if education is privatized, and it really the profit is the ends, then you're not going to see a speech and debate competition gain as much attention as the local football team. It's just not the case. So, yeah, tough questions.
Yeah. Well, and the privatization of schools is I think that's a totally separate issue, because a lot of people who are pushing for that are doing for it like on ideological grounds. I mean, athletics and entertainment is like its own issue, and like that's going to happen at all the state schools. But I do feel like a big reason that people, they want to go to like a voucher system or something is because they just don't want current information taught in schools. And I feel like that's really been like the last 7 years, where we've had really like top level political issues be hashed out on the federal level, but you're going to see the biggest like ideological fights happening in these places where people can win school board positions and stuff like that with, a few hundred votes. And I mean, if you even just paid attention to the school board races, we had ideologues who were running right here in Mankato, and the margins were a few hundred votes. So
Yeah.
You mentioned that a big part of the Lectern series and this project in general is interrogating. Is it interrogating like your own beliefs, or? And I think you use that as a term that's not like an attack on the person talking,
No.
but it's more of like work. Can
It's-
you
it's-
elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's more about questioning.
Okay.
So you are questioning all the information that you're exposed to. So if I look at, even with experience, to use an example, if I experience something and I base my knowledge off that experience, that comes from a very empirical point of view, but that also is very, it makes sense, but it makes sense to me subjectively. At that, if I based all my knowledge off experience, then you can easily lose that attachment to empathy. You can see someone else's situation and be like, well, I didn't experience that, so I don't care. But empathy, I would say, it's an attribute of consciousness. I would not say experience and influence. I think they have to be filtered through our consciousness by using attributes such as reason. And then once you apply reason to something, you use logic to decide whether that's good or bad reason, which again kind of touches on morality, which is like a whole other issue. So yeah, I think it's really the process of realizing it's for the most part, it's very it's like what Socrates spoke about, which he never wrote anything, but it was said or written that he never he would constantly be like, I know nothing. I don't truly know anything because my knowledge is constantly updating and changing. It's to a certain degree in flux.
Well, and I feel like the community environment of the event too also adds a layer of that. I mean, we always encourage when we have a solo speaker to do a Q&A. And I mean, that was an initial idea. And I remember our first lectern, we were a little concerned that nobody would want to participate and it would be crickets. And we'd be like, okay, well, thanks for coming. Bye. But I would say some of the most engaging parts of the Lectern series is that Q&A. It's that community questioning. It always leads to very fruitful conversations. And sometimes the questions are quite challenging, especially if you are the speaker. But it's so fruitful. What happens? It brings a whole nother layer to the series. Is that community Q&A, that discussion time. I mean, we've had very long like Q&A sessions before, but
Sometimes they're longer than the actual talks.
yeah.
Which makes sense.
yeah, so it's nice.
Set up to support that well. That sounds neat.
Yeah.
Can you maybe zoom back out a little bit and just touch on the format, like what somebody maybe could expect showing up, or like curious about how it's going to go. So if they're curious about participating.
Yeah, well, we typically do like a 1 hour social time, cocktails too, get everyone kind of mingling, meeting one another, get comfortable in your space. And then, we have had solo speakers where they prepare a talk or a presentation. We have had writers. We have had speeches. And then we have also, this previous year, we did do 2 like open sessions where we kind of gave a bit of a theme and let people work around that. And we've had a harp player, Amy Cordum, which was unique to have this giant harp. We've had people read fiction, poetry,
Piano.
play piano. What was the other instrument we had?
I don't
Oh, we had
remember.
another instrument. But yeah, kind of, just opening it up for everyone to kind of get them a little more comfortable. So yeah, we're always open to whatever people want to share. And then, yeah, we usually encourage like a Q&A at the events where we have multiple people sharing. We typically end with another social hour. But it's been really wonderful. And actually, I've even discovered new things about people I've known for years through the lectern. Katie Boone is a phenomenal piano player. Phenomenal. And I had no idea she could play piano. And at one of our sessions where we had multiple people join us, she got up and played this beautiful, beautiful piece that she had composed herself. So, yeah, really lovely.
That's neat. And are there dates upcoming that people can show up to, or is this are we preparing for kind of a next season? Right now?
Yep, we are actually getting loaded up for the next year. We're currently scheduling everyone out, but actually on February 25th at 6 p.m., we will have Nicholas. He's going to be doing a Lectern Series. He actually wrote a book in his free time. He wrote a book. And so he's going to be speaking on that, and that will be at 507 Record Street
Yeah. Yeah.
at his home. So.
Yeah. I mean, there were times where we were not sure if we should be having it in just someone's house. But that's been great so far. I think we've had how many at your house? Like 3 or
Two. We did one indoors, and we did one in my garden.
Oh, 2 in your garden.
Yeah,
spoke in
I
your
did.
garden
I
too.
did a speech about Walt Whitman, so we had to do it outdoors, and I did it in the garden, and it was beautiful. At one point, there were a bunch of birds that flew over, and very magical, very poetic.
Locusts.
And,
Yeah, locusts,
I remember
children.
the cicadas in one of the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
They kind of drown out the speaker, which is, I don't know. It's kind of nice.
It is nice.
This is all. I mean, because I saw it. It's all obviously broadcast online too. Can you just go on a little bit about what the desired impacts are and like how you'd like to see the thing grow or impact the community?
Quite truthfully, I like the idea of some type of response. It doesn't matter really what the response is, but that's my ultimate goal. I feel that it's often that if someone is giving a speech and they don't get a response, then that speech is to some degree negated. So a response is to some degree critical for speech to make any kind of impact. Other than that, I just want, I want people to be able to feel comfortable enough and to know that they have a platform for expressing themselves and to not be intimidated. And ideally, I don't see it growing outside of what it already is. Philosophically, maybe, but how we plan on organizing the event, I think it'll just so far remain the same.
Yeah, this is a passion project. I mean, we're not going to lose funding or, lose sleep. I mean, actually, the reason we began recording was because our very first event, we were like, oh my gosh, will anyone come to this? This is kind of crazy idea, right? And we were so nervous. It was almost time. We had poet Eddie Mikas, who's a very good friend of mine and a phenomenal poet and writer, former educator. He was our inaugural speaker. And I remember it was about time to start. And I told Nicholas, I said, we'll record it because people can access it. And that's what we're doing. Like, we're committed to this idea. We're not going to quit. And a few minutes before, people started showing up. And it was magical. It was like, okay, there's a belief. Like, people want to participate in this. There's a need for this. There's a reaction for this. But we do continue to try to record because we do recognize that, like, maybe not everyone can attend in person. We have had people from very far away watch. And we do like to try to record them because we do want a bit of a like a resource for people. And I do know in the future we have talked about maybe even having like a kind of crowdsourced page on the website where if you have something that was recently published or something that you've worked on that you're very proud of, maybe you're not comfortable standing in front of a crowd. Some people have legitimate stage fright. You could still share your knowledge, share your accomplishment there, and people can access it and learn from it. And yeah, so I mean, it's just all about making it available, you know?
Yeah, that's great. My last question is, could you describe to me the difference between a lectern and a podium?
We were talking about this in the elevator.
I personally, I didn't prepare for this. I would personally just initially say that a podium feels almost like a place of power, like a podium does. I don't know. Like it seems like that is a place for announcements and for
Rhetoric.
rhetoric. Hey, watch it. We just had a really tough discussion on rhetoric the other night. We spend hours philosophizing too. No, a podium is a place with a concrete delivery or message, and it feels a little powerful. Whereas I feel like a lectern, even the word just sounds a little more like Renaissance. And I think a lectern is a platform. Gosh, we've used that word a lot, but a platform for sharing knowledge. And
Yeah, the lectern, like, so we have no idea when this thing was made.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of like
It's
looking
old.
inside of it and trying to find a date. And one of the interesting things we found was when you flip it upside down, there was an old magazine that must have bled on top of it. And it just says Christie's across the top. And it looked like a headline. And so I looked it up, and it turns out that Christie's is what is it, an auction?
an auction house
Yeah, it's an auction house.
in
And-
London.
And yes,
Yeah, in
in
London.
London. And it started in 1792. And this thing has been, it's been repaired. I believe at one time the top opened up, but then they sealed it. So yeah, it would be kind of interesting to get it appraised, or at least get
Yeah.
someone to come in and look at it just to see
It
when
would be
was
cool to
actually made.
date it, but not to
Well, not to-
get it.
yeah, not to-
Are you
I'm not gonna sell
thinking then that there's some chance it was like used in that auction house as like a
That's what I'm
auctioning
thinking.
spot?
Yeah.
I'm wondering that. My aunt actually called it an old lectern, and she said there was a place where the candle sat.
And there is on the right hand. Like,
But
top.
I don't know if it's for a candle. It could be for one
A
of
gavel.
those gavel things.
Okay.
Yeah, like you
know.
won.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
But-
possible it was an auction company.
Yeah. If you attend our event, you will see too. We do always place red candle on the lectern, even
Yeah,
outdoors.
And red was her favorite color.
Yep, red was her favorite color. So we always light a red candle for each event when the speaker begins.
Okay. Well, my last question now is like maybe just briefly what you've each kind of learned about the oral tradition, either through the series or through your own teaching
Yeah.
careers.
Well, I like I shared, I teach right now. I teach up at MSU. I'm finishing up my master's. I'm also a poet, a writer. And it's one thing to be in school and to prepare something for a grade. And it's a completely different thing to prepare something that you're going to give as a speech. I'm a little different than Nicholas. I worked on mine for a while and I couldn't quite figure out where I was going with it. And I'm not even joking, 8 hours before the lectern began that I was speaking at.
1 hour.
Well, I mean, okay, first it started 8
Still
hours
working on
before.
it.
I was like, okay, well, I think I'm going to bring Emily Dickinson in on this, but I'm not sure how I'm going to connect it. But it was like, the information was kind of like transforming. And I think you even used that word earlier, like how knowledge is not stagnant. It's always changing. And so even in researching additionally to give my speech, my speech kept transforming. And then, yes, an hour before the lectern, I finished it. Not because I was lazy. I am a procrastinator. I won't, you know, lie about that. But it just, it was very important to me, and the level of care that I had to put into it. And I'll tell you, I was nervous. I do a lot of speaking. I don't have a problem shutting up, but I was initially quite nervous. And towards the end of it, I was really shocked at how knowledgeable I was on the topic I was speaking on. And I think that's a very common thing, especially with teachers. I know I've experienced it, is this imposter syndrome. You know, Nicholas talked about like what makes you an expert. And I've felt that many, many years, you know, as I teach, and it's something that I'm learning. I am an expert at what I know because I know it. And I don't know, it was a very great experience. And then the Q&A kind of blew me away too, because people asked me really hard questions. I was like, oh my gosh, I know the answer to that. Like, I know this. I am an expert. Like, I have spent so much time with this, and I get to share this now with you. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting process to do it, and to do it for no grade, no pay. It's just literally to share with others. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I spent a good probably 15 years in isolation. I spent about 14 years in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and then I moved to Minneapolis, and from that point, I didn't really have any community after that. And so I kind of moved around Minneapolis, and I ended up out in a town called Excelsior. And I had never spoken in front of people at all. And so it was a completely different, I've learned so much by like how to prepare something, how to make myself feel comfortable to be able to speak about something in an articulate way. So for me, it's been a very much a challenge to be able to give a talk and kind of try my best to back up what I'm saying.
What if anything do you feel like this platform that you've created offers that others kind of fail to? Because I feel like that is a big thing, is people don't really feel supported, especially or people feel like they're yelling into the void a lot.
I would say that we offer accessibility and equitability. You know, you don't have to have a long resume. You don't have to have impressive publications in your name. You don't have to come with this extensive outline. We're really open to everybody. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. And the fact that it is independent, like we're not, you know, in it for a profit. We're just doing it because we're passionate.
Cool.
Yeah.
The other thing that I feel like I noticed was a lot of the questioning and conversation, maybe, that feels like something I haven't seen well introduced into a lot of formats. I'm sure there's some good examples. But,
Yeah, yeah.
But that seems special
Yeah,
about
there's a lot of really great events in Mankato, like Writer's Block.
Yeah,
right?
yep, and the Good Thunder reading series. And actually, I'm really glad you said that, because those are all wonderfully established, you know, well-attended events that we actually encourage everyone to go attend. These events are wonderful. But we offer like another level, you know, like another niche. I mean, you could come and read poetry if you'd like at the lectern, but I mean, where do you go give a speech? Where do you talk about, you know, a deep dive into a historic text that you took? Where do you sit and break down philosophy that you've been studying for 20 years? There's not really a place that I know. I mean, if there is, please let
Yeah.
me know. But
Well, even for some of the writers that have spoke, quite truthfully, it was almost like they were giving a thesis. So in some situations, if someone's in, like he was in the master's program, right? Michonne
Yep.
was.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was almost like a little bit of preparation for that for him.
Yeah.
I would say it was probably more intense than his thesis.
Yeah.
There were more. He what he did was he would read some of it was flash poetry. Was
Yeah,
it flash
flash fiction.
Flash fiction.
Yeah.
And he would read it, and then he would take questions after it, and then he would go again. And I think it lasted for about an hour.
Well, and it was really lovely because it kind of gives you a little more insight into the written work that you wouldn't probably get somewhere else. I mean, some of the open mics and reading platforms that we have, it's very regimented and timed, and so it's lovely to be able to kind of peel the layers back and hear a little more about the process and the creation, and it makes it more impactful, a little more memorable.
Sure. And if people are like wanting to get involved with the series, if someone wants to speak or attend, like where can they go to find out about that?
We do have a website. It's thelecternseries.com, not the podium series, thelecternseries.com. Got you. He's been quiet over there. And then we do have a Facebook too. You can follow us on there. We have an Insta. And you can reach out to us at email at lecternseries@gmail.com. Or if you ever see us about, like pull us aside. We'd love to get, a slew of people lined up, and we're excited to see what this year's going to bring.
Yeah, I mean, the first, how many months have we had it? For about 6 months?
Yeah.
So it's somewhat of a refresher, starting the year off, and most of the other events that we held were kind of just on a whim, right? I mean,
We didn't,
difficult to get
believe it or not,
people.
we didn't have people like banging down our door like, hey, I want to sign up and give a speech
yeah.
for an
Well,
hour to a room full of
that's
strangers.
still the case.
Yeah, I think people are, it's about spreading the word and like getting people to attend or watch a recording and kind of like feel it out and get more comfortable with it. But yeah, we are really hoping that people will feel empowered to come forward and share what they know, share their knowledge. It says on our website, if you have knowledge, let others light their candle in it. And that's another reason we use the candle.
Cool.
You got any?
No.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show and
Yeah,
sharing
thanks for
this with
having
us.
Yeah, thanks so
That
much.
sounds really cool. Like you said, where would you go to speak about something you've studied? We don't have
Well,
a
here,
great spot for that.
we're talking about it
So.
here.
Lectern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's also the podcast.
We got some options.
Yeah.
If you guys have anyone that wants to practice, I let people do poetry and speeches at my open mic. So if anyone wants like a
lovely.
15-minute practice sesh, come on down, see me.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Jacob, you might need to practice because Jacob said he's going to be a future lectern speaker. So
Do you have any idea what you would want to speak on?
I'm probably going to talk about what like the value I think lies behind speaking itself, and like how much I think can be gained by just like constantly meeting new people, which is like I think that my personal happiness has largely been enabled by these really thin relationships that I keep through serving people alcohol. And like this was before, I worked at Red Rocks before I worked at the Wine Cafe. And I realized when I started at the Wine Cafe that I'd never spoken to any of my customers, but I would see some of these people every week and they would be very happy to see me. Like just very like, and like lots of people wanted like hugs or handshakes or like whatever. And like that feeling of community, no matter how like thin it was, really like I think up my personal happiness. That, and then like coming into a more like intimate place where I am like actually talking to people. I remember when I first started working there, at the wine cafe, I would leave emotionally tired sometimes.
Yeah.
Something that I had never experienced prior. You know, I'd be physically tired before because it was so fast paced. But, you know, then doing this through this program here, I've met over 100 people and spoken with them for mostly, you know, like an hour or so each. And I often think about how it's very likely that very many people will not meet 100 people in their adult lives and sit down and have an hour-long conversation
Right.
with them.
Very true.
It's beautiful.
And I do think that people should. I think that the ability to speak is extremely important. And like, if you're wrong, someone like you just won't. Like, you can type anything into the internet. I believe this. Like, you can type untold cruelty, but like, when you say some of that stuff out loud, like when you say something that's just wrong, even if you believe it, people like it's hard to you hear yourself say it, you see it, people talk to you, and you're like, people will tell you to just shut the hell up. Like it's just not the same, you know. Like I really think that connecting with people and sharing your story, and I mean, even like just talking about your personal experiences or telling jokes and like feeling that social pressure, like the ebb and flow of the thing is what we're kind of missing out on with this kind of great explosion of information that has made us all so much more we're full of information.
Well said.
Nice save.
To continue on that too, like I'm the type of person I'm very bad at reading. I have ADHD and dyslexia, and my retention when I read something is I have to read like a 100-page book. Will take me hours and hours to read because I have to go back and reread stuff. So most of the skills or information I know has been from someone that was like excited to teach about it, or like someone like I literally learned sound because someone didn't want to do it anymore. So they were like, "Hey, you want to learn how to do this so I can leave," or something like that. So to me, this type of thing is super, super important because, yeah, like I said, I can read articles all day, but I will retain what I'm taught way more if I can like talk to someone or hear someone speak about it.
Right.
That's lovely.
Yeah, I tell you what, learning is just a thing people should be doing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not. I every single time I dropped out of college, I was like, this is a dumb hoop, and I'm sick of jumping through it. And I have a podcast.
I gotta tread softly because, like I said, I teach at MSU, but I feel the same way, and I've had experiences like that in my past, which I think makes me very passionate about teaching. And like I love what you shared too about how hey, I can't read at the same rate as everyone else, and like it's very effective for me to hear this, and I think that's beautiful, like to accommodate on so many different levels and to respond to the community as individuals and as people and not as just like units and this is what you get, here you go. And I think that's important.
Well, I mean, to add to that statement, I am very like I want education to be widely available. I wish the way that like higher learning institutions worked is that you went in and you just attended. And I do think that having it be all like based upon credentials and like seeking a certain piece of paper, because like there's lots of things I would love to learn about, but like every time I've gone down that road, I've never had a job in mind that I wanted at the other side of it. So it's like, I could always just get a book. Like, is the debt worth it?
Right.
And that's, I mean, I really think that higher education should, at least on the state level, be publicly available to people so that they can just like find out what interests them.
Yeah. When I lived in California, I chose, and this was right after I graduated high school, and I moved to California, was thinking about universities, and then suddenly I decided to go to a very small herbal medicine school where I learned about just plants, and I lived on the property, and I lived in a tent for a year. And it was a wonderful experience. But during that time, I learned how to develop websites. And so because of that and just, learning on my own, that's what I've done for the past 15 years. And I've been able to support myself without having that debt. But at the same time, I'm not, I don't, but there's still parts of me that kind of want to go back to school. Like I want to try it and I want to do it. So.
Yeah, I feel that. Like if I had any kind of real, if I could put myself in a direction that, if I had some kind of dream that wasn't one I'm currently working on, I would certainly be doing something about it, So they're just, it has something to do, with like how people will become like, it is not even necessarily even just capital debt, like the amount of money you owe. There's like a social debt to the thing too. It's probably best for another time, or maybe I can jab about it on the lectern.
I was going to say that could be our motto. Like, in the meantime, before college, come to the lectern.
Get over your fears.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on, and
Yeah, thanks for having us.
if you're
Yeah,
still
thank you.
listening, go to the lectern website and then the show. And then
Absolutely.
watch the stream while you're there.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.